We had been married for over a decade, and to the outside world, our life seemed like a dream come true. People often said we were the perfect couple. Lisa, the charismatic force of nature, and me, the steady anchor keeping everything grounded. I heard it from her friends, from our neighbors, even from strangers at parties who'd see the way she smiled at me, or how we seemed to finish each other's sentences. If only they'd known. When I met Lisa, it was like a spotlight turned on in my life. I had been stumbling through the monotony of post college life, working a forgettable desk job and living paycheck to paycheck without much ambition beyond surviving the week. And then she came along. Lisa was like something out of a movie. Her confidence practically oozed off her, and she had this magnetic way of making everyone feel special, like they were the most important person in the room. From the moment we started dating, I was hooked. She made me feel alive, like I was finally living in color instead of shades of gray. We would spend hours talking about everything and nothing, walking through the city, grabbing late night coffee, and planning a future that seemed full of endless possibilities. When I proposed to her after just a year of dating, my friends said I was crazy. She's way out of your league, they joked. I laughed along with them, but deep down I knew they were right. I never quite understood why someone like Lisa would choose someone like me, a guy with a stable but unremarkable career, a decent sense of humor, and a tendency to overthink everything. But she did, or at least that's what I believed. Our wedding day was magical, and I don't use that word lightly. Lisa looked radiant in her dress, her eyes shimmering with tears as she walked down the aisle. I remember thinking, this is it. This is my forever. When we exchanged vows, her voice wavered with emotion, and for a moment I felt like the luckiest man alive. Her promises about loyalty, partnership, and love were etched into my heart. For the first few years, married life was everything I imagined. We bought a cozy little house with a white picket fence, something Lisa had always dreamed of. We filled it with memories, movie nights on the couch, Sunday brunches on the patio, and holiday gatherings with family and friends. I worked hard to provide for us, often pulling long hours and skipping vacations to save for the future. Lisa always assured me it was worth it. I'm proud of you, she'd say, wrapping her arms around me after I come home exhausted from work. You're the hardest working man I know. Those moments were like fuel for my soul. They made me believe I was doing everything right, that I was enough. But looking back now, there were cracks in the foundation even then. At the time, I chalked up her distant moments to stress or the natural ebb and flow of marriage. She was busy with her career, a rising star at her company, always attending networking events and conferences. I never questioned her frequent absences or her sudden late night work emergencies. After all, wasn't that what marriage was about? Trusting each other? I ignored the warning signs, like the way she'd quickly silence her phone whenever I walked into the room, or how she always seemed to be texting someone during our quiet evenings together. I even convinced myself that the faint scent of cologne on her clothes must have come from a crowded elevator or a handshake with a colleague. There was one moment, though, that stuck with me, a moment I pushed deep into the recesses of my mind, unwilling to let it fester. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Lisa was in the backyard tending to her garden. I was cleaning up in the kitchen when her phone buzzed on the counter. A name flashed on the screen. Brian. The text read, "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." I stood there frozen. My chest tightened and my hands started to shake. For a split second, I considered opening the message, but something held me back. Instead, I took a deep breath and walked outside, pretending I hadn't seen anything. "Who's Brian?" I asked casually, my voice betraying none of the turmoil I felt inside. She didn't miss a beat. "Oh, just a guy from work," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "He's helping me with a new project." Her explanation sounded so natural, so innocent, that I felt guilty for even asking. I told myself I was overreacting, that Lisa would never betray me. But still, a part of me couldn't shake the unease. Over the years, those little moments added up. The missed calls, the unexplained receipts, the nights she came home later and later. I buried them all under a mountain of excuses, convincing myself that every marriage had its quirks, its secrets. After all, Lisa loved me, didn't she? It wasn't until our 12th wedding anniversary that the carefully constructed image of our marriage began to unravel. I had planned a quiet evening at home, just the two of us. Over the years, Lisa had often told me she preferred intimate celebrations over grand gestures, so I decided to cook her favorite meal: salmon with lemon butter and roasted asparagus, paired with a bottle of wine from the vineyard we visited on our honeymoon. I left work early that day, eager to surprise her. On the way home, I picked up a bouquet of lilies, her favorite, and a small gift: a bracelet I had saved up for over the past few months. It wasn't extravagant, but I knew it would mean something to her. At least, I thought it would. When I walked through the door, I was met with an eerie silence. No soft music playing, no scented candles lit, no Lisa bustling around the house. Her car was parked in the driveway, so I assumed she was upstairs getting ready. "Lisa!" I called out, setting the flowers and gift down on the kitchen counter. There was no response. I wandered through the house, peeking into each room. It wasn't until I reached the bedroom that I noticed something odd. Her phone was lying on the nightstand, buzzing intermittently. Lisa never left her phone unattended, let alone in plain sight. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that even as I picked it up. But some gut instinct overrode my sense of decency. The screen lit up with a notification. "David, can't stop thinking about last night. When can we meet again?" I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands trembled as I stared at the message, the words searing into my brain like a brand. Who the hell was David? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coworker joking around, or maybe it wasn't even meant for her. But then why would he say last night? My mind spun in circles, desperately searching for an innocent explanation. Lisa walked in a few minutes later carrying a shopping bag and humming a tune. She froze when she saw me holding her phone. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice unnaturally calm. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. My throat felt dry and my chest was tight. I just held up the phone, letting the message speak for itself. Her expression didn't change much. No tears, no frantic explanations. Just a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Was it fear, guilt, annoyance? "It's not what you think," she said, reaching for the phone. "Then what is it?" I demanded, stepping back. My voice was louder than I intended, echoing through the room. She sighed, the kind of sigh someone gives when they're tired of explaining themselves. "Dave, it's just a friend. We went out for drinks last night after work, that's all." The words were smooth, rehearsed, but there was something in her tone, something detached that set me on edge. "Just a friend?" I repeated, holding up the phone. "Because this doesn't sound like something you'd send to a friend." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment it felt like we were two strangers staring each other down. "Look, I don't know what you're trying to accuse me of, but I don't have to explain myself," she said, snatching the phone from my hand. "I told you, it's not what you think." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But something in her demeanor, her lack of panic, her refusal to offer more details, made the doubts in my mind grow louder. For the next few days, I tried to shake the incident off. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Lisa had never given me a reason not to trust her, but I couldn't stop thinking about the text, about the way she brushed off my questions so easily. That's when I started noticing other things, little things that seemed harmless on their own, but painted a damning picture when pieced together. She began working later than usual, often claiming she had last-minute meetings or deadlines. She stopped inviting me to her company events, saying they were boring or just for employees. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find her side of the bed empty, only to hear the faint hum of her voice coming from downstairs. One evening, I decided to follow her. It felt wrong, intrusive, but the gnawing suspicion had become unbearable. She had told me she was meeting a client for dinner, so I parked across the street from the restaurant she mentioned and waited. Sure enough, Lisa arrived, but not alone. She was with a man, someone I didn't recognize. They laughed as they walked inside, his hand lingering on the small of her back. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to burst into the restaurant and confront her, demand answers in front of everyone. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, couldn't bear the thought of what I might hear. When she came home that night, she kissed me on the cheek and told me she was exhausted. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, pretending everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. The cracks in our marriage were no longer small or subtle, they were gaping fissures, threatening to swallow me whole. By the time I discovered Jason, I thought I had already hit rock bottom, but life has a cruel way of showing you just how much further you can fall. Jason wasn't just some stranger, he was someone I knew, someone we both knew. We had met him at one of Lisa's company parties a few years back. I remember shaking his hand, laughing at his jokes, and even clinking glasses with him during a toast. He was charming in a way that made people gravitate toward him, the kind of guy who made everyone in the room feel like they mattered. I never thought to be suspicious. Why would I? Lisa had introduced him as a close colleague, someone she worked with on major projects. They often collaborated late into the night, but she always framed it as part of her job. Jason's a workaholic, she'd say with a laugh. He doesn't let anyone leave the office until everything's perfect. I even joked about it once, calling him her work husband. The irony of that memory stung like salt in an open wound. The truth came out in the cruelest way possible, by accident. It started with a voicemail. I had been working late one evening when Lisa's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower, so I didn't think twice about glancing at the screen. It wasn't a text this time. It was a missed call from Jason. Moments later, a voicemail notification popped up. I hesitated, feeling like I was crossing some invisible line, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, got the better of me. I tapped the notification and holding the phone up to my ear. "Hey, babe," Jason's voice began, casual and confident. "Just wanted to say I had an amazing time last night. Can't stop thinking about you. Let me know when you can sneak away again. Love you. Love you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I might be sick. I replayed the message 3 times, hoping I had misheard him, that it was some cruel misunderstanding, but the words didn't change. When Lisa came out of the shower, I was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in front of me like evidence in a trial. She stopped in her tracks when she saw the look on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, wrapping a towel around herself. I didn't say anything at first. I just hit play on the voicemail, letting Jason's voice fill the room. Her face turned pale. For the first time in all the years I'd known her, she was speechless. "Say something," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like she was searching for the right words and coming up empty. Finally, she sat down across from me, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she said softly. Her words sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. "Find out like this? So you admit it? It's true?" She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Jason and it's been going on for a while, but it's complicated." "Complicated?" I interrupted, slamming my hand on the table. "You're sleeping with him, Lisa. What the hell is complicated about that?" She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she started to cry, her face buried in her hands. Normally, seeing her like that would have softened me, but this time, I felt nothing but emptiness. "How long?" I demanded. She looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "A couple of years." The words hit me like a freight train. A couple of years. While I was working late to provide for us, while I was planning anniversary surprises and buying her gifts, she was with him. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need some air," I muttered, grabbing my jacket. "Wait," she called after me. "Please, let me explain." But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I walked out the door and kept walking, not caring where I ended up. For the next few days, I didn't go home. I wandered the streets, crashing on park benches and in my car, trying to make sense of everything. I replayed every moment of our marriage in my head, searching for signs I had missed. Every laugh, every kiss, every shared memory now felt tainted, like they belonged to someone else. I thought about confronting Jason, about storming into his office and demanding answers. But what would it change? Nothing he could say would undo what had already been done. Eventually, I returned home not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. Lisa was waiting for me, sitting on the couch with a box of tissues. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of her guilt had physically diminished her. "I want to work through this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed bitterly. Work through this? Lisa, you've been cheating on me for years. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? To us? She didn't respond, just stared at her hands. I can't do this anymore, I said finally. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and awkward conversations. Friends and family wanted to know what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the whole truth. It was too humiliating. Now, as I sit here signing the divorce papers, I feel a strange sense of relief. The life I thought I had is gone, but so is the weight of the lies. For the first time in years, I feel free to start over, free to rebuild. Lisa once told me that love was about trust. Looking back, I realized she was right. But trust isn't something you can fake or rebuild once it's been shattered. I still remember the day we exchanged our vows. It wasn't just a ceremony, it felt like a covenant etched into the fabric of the universe. The rain outside the chapel wasn't a downpour, just a soft, rhythmic drizzle, the kind that makes everything feel alive and raw. I remember thinking how symbolic it was, like the sky was cleansing the earth in preparation for our future. Her smile that day was radiant enough to convince me the world was on our side. We were young, hopeful, and as I would later learn, incredibly naive. In the beginning, everything felt like a dream. Our first apartment was a tiny shoebox in the city, barely big enough to fit our bed, and a second-hand couch. But to us, it was a castle. We didn't need space, we had each other. Late nights meant cheap takeout and tangled legs on the couch. Weekends were spontaneous road trips, chasing sunsets, with the windows down and the radio blaring our favorite songs. For 15 years, I clung to that image of us. Every anniversary, I'd find myself replaying those early days like a favorite movie, oblivious to the director's cut happening behind the scenes. I thought we had built a fortress of trust, love, and commitment. But even fortresses crumble when the foundation is weak. The cracks started small, so small, in fact, I almost didn't notice. I remember the first time I felt a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. She'd come home late from a work event, her cheeks flushed and her smile too bright. How was it? I asked, wrapping my arms around her. Exhausting, she said, resting her head on my shoulder. Networking is so draining. She smelled like wine and expensive cologne. Not hers, not mine. I brushed it off as paranoia. People hug at events, I told myself. They toast with champagne. It was nothing. But then, there was the necklace. A receipt I found tucked into her coat pocket while cleaning up before one of our date nights. I wasn't snooping. I never had a reason to. But there it was. A sliver of paper that changed everything. It wasn't the price that struck me, though it was expensive enough to warrant a conversation. It was the engraving that froze me. To new adventures. The phrase didn't feel like ours. We didn't have adventures. We had routines, responsibilities, and occasional date nights when life allowed. When I confronted her, I chose my words carefully, as if I was afraid of shattering something fragile. Who's the necklace for? I asked casually, holding the receipt up like a neutral observer. She barely looked at it before laughing. Oh, that? It's for a coworker, Steve. He's retiring, and we all chipped in for a gift. Her explanation was delivered with such ease, such confidence, that I felt like a fool for even asking. She kissed me on the cheek, calling me sweet for noticing the little things. And just like that, the doubt was swept under the rug. But doubt doesn't disappear. It lingers, festering in the corners of your mind. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The late-night phone calls she said were work-related, spoken in hushed tones in the kitchen while I pretended to sleep. The lingerie she bought for herself, but I'd never seen her wear for me. Business trips that always seemed to be to the same city, with itineraries that felt too vague for someone as detail-oriented as her. Stop overthinking, I told myself. She's your wife. She loves you. But love isn't enough when trust begins to erode, and as much as I tried to ignore it, the signs became harder to dismiss. There was a growing gap between us, subtle at first, like the space between clasped hands loosening over time. She stopped laughing at my jokes. I stopped asking her about her day. We became actors playing parts in a story I no longer recognized. One night, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch, her scrolling through her phone and me pretending to watch a rerun of a show we both used to love, I felt it. The silence between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was heavy, like a thick fog that neither of us knew how to clear. "Everything okay?" I asked, breaking the quiet. "Of course," she replied without looking up. But it wasn't. Deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was missing. Something I couldn't put my finger on yet. And worse, I had no idea how long it had been gone. Looking back, I wonder if part of me always knew. If the tiny red flags, the necklace, the late nights, the subtle shifts in her behavior were just pieces of a puzzle I was too scared to complete, because acknowledging them would mean facing the truth that the life I thought we were building together was never really ours. It was a Tuesday night when everything changed. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted and ready to sink into the couch with a cold beer, pretending the world outside didn't exist. The house was quiet, which struck me as odd. She was usually home by now, but not today. I shrugged it off. Maybe she had been stuck at the office later than usual. I wasn't exactly worried. After all, she had been doing that a lot lately, working longer hours. I assumed she was just pushing for a promotion, just like she'd been talking about. As I unpacked my briefcase and grabbed the remote, I glanced over at her phone on the kitchen counter. It buzzed and then buzzed again. My mind was busy with the mundane, what I was going to have for dinner, whether I had enough laundry to do, but something in my gut made me stop. It was like my body knew before my mind could catch up. The screen lit up. Her phone was always face down, and I'd never really given it much thought before, but today it felt like it was staring at me, taunting me, even. There it was, a text message from a name I didn't recognize. "Last night was incredible. Same time. Thursday?" For a split second, I couldn't breathe. The world didn't make sense. I thought my vision had blurred. I thought I was imagining things. I didn't want to believe it. Hell, I didn't even want to touch the damn phone. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I didn't even make the decision. My hands moved on their own. I picked up her phone, hesitated for a brief moment, and then unlocked it. The truth was now a weight on my chest. The messages that followed were a gut punch. Casual conversations, jokes, plans, none of which involved me. My thumb shook as I scrolled through them. They were so easy, so familiar with each other. "I can't stop thinking about you. Meet me at the usual place after work." 1,000 lies painted over with sweet, honeyed words. It wasn't just one man either. It was more. A lot more. Names I didn't recognize. Pictures I wasn't meant to see. She had been living two lives for as long as I could remember. Every text, every photo, every conversation was a piece of a mosaic that shattered my entire world. One message stood out more than the rest. A picture. Her face, her lips redder than they ever were when she kissed me. She was smiling, sure, but the smile wasn't for me. It was for him. The man in the picture standing next to her, a hand wrapped around her waist in a way I never did. His face was unfamiliar, but his hold on her was clear. His smile wasn't fake. The look in his eyes wasn't hidden. He had her. My heart wasn't just broken, it was cracked open. I couldn't breathe. The rage, the sadness, the disbelief, it all hit at once, crashing over me like a tidal wave. I had no idea what to do with any of it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone, to tear the walls down, but instead I sat there in silence, the screen of her betrayal lighting up my face. Then the door opened and she walked in. Her presence filled the room, her laughter and energy, everything about her so normal, so unaware. She took one look at me sitting there, her phone in my hands, and stopped dead in her tracks. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion but not alarm. She was too calm, too composed. I held up the phone, my fingers trembling as I stared at her. "You tell me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She froze, her eyes scanning the screen. I could see her mind working, processing the truth that I had found her out. I watched her face shift through a range of emotions, guilt, anger, panic, but most of all, something else I hadn't expected. Defensiveness. "You went through my phone?" she asked, her voice rising in fake outrage. How dare you? I laughed, bitter, short, and empty. How dare I repeated, the absurdity of it all hitting me like a punch. How dare you? She didn't answer. Instead, she took a step back, her body language shifting into something cold, something distant. It's not what you think, she said, her tone a little too practiced, like she had rehearsed this lie in front of a mirror. You've misunderstood. The urge to confront her, to make her see the magnitude of what she'd done, was overwhelming. But there was a calmness in me now, a numbness that pushed everything else out. I couldn't cry, I couldn't yell. I couldn't do anything except sit there and watch her try to justify the indefensible. Who is he? I asked quietly, but there was venom behind the question. I didn't need her to answer. I already knew the truth. Does it really matter? She shot back. You've been so distant lately. You think I don't feel that? I needed someone. I shook my head slowly, disbelief creeping in. You needed someone else? For 15 years, while I was right here? The weight of the years we'd spent together felt heavier now. The laughs, the memories, the arguments, all of it felt like a lie. A story I'd been reading without realizing the plot had been twisted all along. Her face twisted with something darker. Don't pretend you've been the perfect husband. She spat, her voice sharp now. You're always so busy, always working, always distracted. I've had to do everything on my own. The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were true, but because they were an easy out for her, an excuse, a deflection from the reality of her actions. And just like that, I realized she wasn't sorry, not one bit. She wasn't even ashamed. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was angry at me for exposing her lies. I dropped the phone onto the table and stood up. The weight of everything I'd just discovered felt suffocating. The years we had spent together didn't matter anymore. The trust, the promises, the life we had, none of it existed. I'm leaving, I said quietly, each word feeling like it was dragging me through mud. I can't stay here, not anymore. She didn't try to stop me. Instead, she just stood there watching me go, as if it was all part of some play we had rehearsed 1,000 times. As I walked out the door, the silence in the house swallowed me whole. The house that had once felt like a home was now nothing more than a shell of shattered promises. And as I drove away, all I could think was, how did I miss it? How did I never see the truth? I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. The days blurred into one long stretch of emptiness as I wandered through life like a ghost, moving through the motions, but feeling disconnected from everything. I stayed in the guest room, not because she asked me to, but because it felt like the only space left to me. The bed we once shared had become a prison. There was no comfort there, only echoes of laughter and whispered words now turned hollow. She tried, of course. The first few days after I confronted her were filled with apologies, explanations, and promises. She sat on the edge of the guest bed, eyes wide and pleading, asking me to listen to her side of things. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. You don't understand. It just happened. But I did understand. I understood all too well. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. Sorry that the life she'd so carefully constructed, the one that revolved around a man who trusted her, had crumbled into dust. She wasn't apologizing for betraying me. She was apologizing for ruining her own comfort. At first, I played along. I tried to listen, to give her the benefit of the doubt, but the more she talked, the more disgusted I became. There were no real explanations, just endless excuses. It wasn't you. It was me. I needed something different. I stopped believing her the moment she tried to turn it all around on me. You've been so distant lately, she said, as if the years of my dedication to her didn't matter. You were always working, always preoccupied. I needed someone to feel something with. It was an insult, wrapped up in a sad attempt at deflection. The nerve of her to place the blame on me when I was the one who had been giving everything I had. For the first time, I saw her for who she really was. Not the woman I thought I knew, but someone who was willing to burn everything to the ground for her own selfish desires. She had been living this double life for so long, keeping up appearances, keeping me in the dark, while she played out her fantasies with other men. Men I didn't know, men she didn't care about, as long as they were filling the gaps she claimed I had left. I could feel myself breaking under the weight of it all. I didn't want to stay there anymore, in that house with those lies. But I didn't know where to go either. Friends? Number I didn't want to tell them. This kind of thing wasn't meant to be shared. It felt like a failure I had to swallow on my own. Family? Same thing. I didn't want to burden them with my mess. I walked the streets at night just to breathe, to escape from the suffocating silence of that house. The city was alive, bustling, full of people who had their own problems to deal with. No one knew me. No one cared about my pain. And in some twisted way, that was the most comforting thing I could find. Days turned into weeks, and I began to lose myself in the nothingness. I stopped caring about what happened next. I didn't care if we fixed things. I didn't care if she cried her way through another apology. I didn't even care if she tried to make it work with me after everything, because how could I trust her again? How could I stand in the same room as someone who had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible? I could feel the weight of her words, even when she wasn't around. The accusations, the guilt, the blame. She told me with such conviction that I had changed over the years. And maybe I had. I wasn't the same man I was when we first met. But I was still trying. I was still committed. I was still here, pouring my energy into a relationship that, for her, had long since turned into a game. But I was the fool, wasn't I? The fool who believed in the happily ever after. The fool who thought that love, once given, was enough to make everything else work. I stayed. I tried. And in the end, I was the one who got played. One afternoon, while I was pacing the kitchen in an attempt to distract myself, I heard the front door open. She came in smiling. Her smile that once made my heart skip a beat now felt like a dagger to my chest. It wasn't the smile I had come to know. It was different. Forced. Like she was trying too hard to convince both of us that everything was fine. "Hey," she said, her tone too light, too cheerful. I turned to face her, but there was no warmth in me, no love. There was only the cold truth. "Hey," I responded, my voice flat, even to my own ears. "You okay?" she asked, already walking toward the kitchen counter as though we hadn't just had our entire life together fall apart. "Fine," I said, though I wasn't. I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I pushed it down. She didn't deserve my rage. She deserved indifference. She had already taken everything else. "Are you sure?" she asked, trying to read me, trying to find something in my eyes that would give her permission to keep playing the victim. "I'm sure," I said, my voice hardening. "I just need to be alone." She nodded. I thought she might try to argue, try to change my mind, but she didn't. She knew. She knew the game was over. That night, as I sat on the edge of the guest bed staring at the wall, I realized something. This wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of everything we had built. Our life together was nothing but a series of lies stacked on top of each other, one after the other, until it collapsed under its own weight. And the worst part was, she didn't even care. She wasn't even sorry. She wasn't going to fight for us. She wasn't going to beg me to stay. She was going to keep living her life, without me, just as she had before. And I would have to accept that. The hardest thing to admit was that she was already gone, physically, emotionally, mentally. She was no longer the person I married. She was someone else entirely, someone I didn't even recognize. And yet, here I was, stuck, clinging to a past that had never truly existed, trying to figure out how to move on when everything I had known was now a lie. I didn't have answers. I didn't have a plan. All I had was the certainty that whatever we were, whatever I thought we could still be, was already over. The person I loved was gone, and in her place was a stranger I was forced to live with every single day.